Hello, and welcome to Next Level Data. We are here to enhance professional baseball players by a data-driven approach to in-game strategy. We have an exciting breakdown coming today for our third video, and if you haven't seen any of our previous episodes, be sure to go check that out on our channel. A reminder that we will be bringing you a new episode each Friday, so comment if you have a specific player whose game you want to see taken to the next level. Now, for today's player, we're going to break down a 5-year MLB veteran who is one of my sleeper picks to have an outstanding 2021 season.
Bringing him in. 3-2.
Got him. 3-2. And finally put.
Zach Eflin was drafted in the first round of the 2012 draft by the San Diego Padres. He was part of the haul that sent Matt Kemp to the Padres in 2014, and on the very next day was traded to the Phillies from the Dodgers in the deal that sent Jimmy Rollins back to LA. Eflin debuted with Philadelphia in 2016 and has started over 80 games for the team in 5 seasons. He struggled in 2016 and 2017 before turning things around in 2018 for what was a stellar season. Eflin regressed slightly in 2019, but had a very encouraging 2020, and I believe he will solidify the Phillies' rotation as one of the dark horse candidates for the best rotations in the National League. This analysis will be slightly different from the last few, as Eflin is already an established big leaguer, but my intention is to provide a few more areas where Eflin can improve his game in order to become a top-of-the-rotation arm. So let's get started. Eflin threw 5 pitches in 2020, a sinker, a four-seam fastball, a curveball, a slider, and a changeup. As we see here, Eflin does have average to below average spin rates, but he's proof that pitchers don't have to spin the ball exceptionally well to see success in the big league. Standing at 6'6", Eflin creates tough angles for hitters, and Eflin's sinker usage is the first thing I realized when looking into his repertoire. As you can see, it's thrown over half the time. We'll dive into this in a bit, but it's an important pillar to remember when looking into his repertoire. Another point of emphasis that we will look at in a second is the difference in pitch distribution when facing right-handed hitters and left-handed hitters, as this is telling to an area of potential improvement for Eflin. This will become an obvious theme throughout the episode, but Eflin's splits are quite different for left-handed hitters and right-handed hitters, so we must remember this when analyzing his data. Lastly, before we dive in, I want to point out that Eflin is a bit different when comparing him to Touki Toussaint or Justin Dunn. Eflin features a more horizontal approach to attacking hitters, where Dunn and Toussaint's was more vertical oriented. This is also important to consider when analyzing concepts and tendencies for Eflin. Now let's look at Eflin's specific offerings. Eflin features 2 fastballs and has fluctuated their usage rate throughout his career. Eflin was using his four-seamer as much as 46% of the time in 2018, but has since then done a 180, using his sinker nearly 52% of the time in 2020 while limiting the use of his four-seamer to around 9%. Over the years, we have seen many pitchers abandon their strengths in favor of certain seasonal trends, and this may have been the case for Eflin. The numbers, however, say that the sinker is the better pitch for him, so this leads me to believe that Eflin should continue to feature the sinker as his primary fastball, although he shouldn't completely abandon his four-seamer, which we will look into in a second. To analyze the sinker, this pitch features above-average horizontal movement and also has an element of seam-shifted wake. If you remember from last week, seam-shifted wake movement can cause a late breaking effect that tends to throw hitters off well. At first glance, Eflin doesn't feature great results from a sinker, but as we dive deeper, we see his expected results are much more encouraging, including his average exit velocity of only 86 miles per hour and an average launch angle of -1. These numbers tell us opponents are not making consistent hard contact off the pitch and are most likely putting the ball in play on the ground, which is ideal if the ball is going to be put in play at all. Now let's move on to the four-seamer. Eflin's four-seamer was saved almost exclusively for left-handed hitters in 2020. Of the 88 four-seamers thrown, 74 were thrown to lefties. This approach seemed to work well for Eflin, as left-handers appeared to struggle with the four-seamer much more than righties did. We see here that both the sinker and the four-seamer are effective against lefties in different ways. The four-seamer seemed to miss more barrels, but when hit had much more damage done to it than the sinker. This is shown by the expected batting average and exit velocities of both pitches. Every specific scenario involves context, but on average, I would recommend around a 50-50 split usage of sinkers and four-seamers to lefties for Eflin in 2021 in order to keep them off balance. For right-handed hitters, Eflin may be better off sticking to the sinker, as righties had an average exit velocity of 95 miles per hour against Eflin's four-seamer. Like his four-seamer, Eflin has pretty drastic splits between righties and lefties with other pitches too, but none are more drastic than this next pitch, so let's move on to dissect. Eflin features a slider and curveball for his breaking pitches. To keep the topic of righty-lefty splits going, we'll start with his slider. As we see here, Eflin's slider yields radically different results based on the batter's handness. And this would lead to the rather obvious decision to not throw the slider to left-handed hitters nearly as much in 2021. Whereas typically lefties hadn't done as much damage to Eflin's slider in previous years, Eflin changed the shape of his slider in 2020 and started throwing it much harder, adding about 3 miles per hour in velocity. This change proved successful against righties, but not so much against lefties, so Eflin should be careful in throwing the pitch at all to left-handed hitters. So the question is, how does Eflin get these left-handed hitters out? Well, the answer to that question may be in his curveball. Eflin's curveball not only stifled lefties in 2020, but also had righties struggling to hit it too. Despite this, Eflin only used the pitch 13% of the time last year, so I believe it would be more beneficial for him to use it both to right-handed hitters and left-handed hitters in 2021. Let's continue addressing how Eflin can get lefties out while transitioning to his changeup. Eflin's changeup is a pitch that has had roller coaster production throughout his 5 years in the big leagues, which in essence defines the current state of the pitch, which is inconsistent. Eflin threw the pitch less than ever in 2020. However, of the 50 times he threw the pitch, 46 times it was thrown to a lefty. Based on the movement of the pitch, I do think the changeup can be used effectively against lefties. And given the above-average horizontal break and similar release height as his sinker and four-seamer, the changeup should be able to tunnel well with his fastballs, creating timing issues with hitters. However, sometimes, Eflin's changeup can get slightly too firm and hang up in the zone. This is not only from what I've seen studying his film, but also is reflective in the vertical break of his changeup, which is below average in terms of inches of drop. Let's look at the difference in a good changeup versus a bad changeup for Eflin. These videos are both from the same stadium and camera position, so don't worry about the camera angle, as it's the same.
Swing and a miss. It's a career-high 10.
Now let's look at the changeup we want to avoid.
Line drive, base hit into left center field.
We saw a clear difference in the first changeup, which featured depth and arm side run, whereas the second changeup hung up in the zone for too long. If Eflin can consistently add more depth to his changeup, I believe it can be another possible weapon for him to use against left-handed hitters. Now, let's wrap things up for Eflin as we provide 3 keys to success for him in 2021. Number 1, address left-handed hitters differently. Eflin should consider doing away with any sliders to lefties, as his curveball, mix of fastballs, and occasional changeups should keep hitters off balance. Speak of, Eflin should focus on making that changeup more consistent, with more depth. I also would love to see Eflin split four-seamer and sinker usage evenly whenever facing lefties. Number 2, increase curveball usage percentage to both right-handed hitters and left-handed hitters. The curveball was Eflin's best pitch in 2020, and I would not recommend throwing your best pitch only 13% of the time. The pitch was exceptional to both righties and lefties, so I'd love to see Eflin use the pitch at least 20% of the time in 2021. Number 3, play to your strength. Eflin has many great qualities, and I hope that he leans into them in 2021. Eflin is not a guy who should be looking to lead the league in strikeouts per 9, but I do think he has the stuff to limit runs and create weak contact. I suggest he play into this strength and use it to the best of his ability. I'm sure new Phillies pitching coach Caleb Cotham will implement many of the things I'm pointing out for Eflin, but it is always up to the player to accept the information given and apply it in games. Zach Eflin is one of my dark horse candidates in the Cy Young race this year because I do believe he will implement some of these strategies. I'm excited to see how he attacks left-handed hitters and to watch him continue to become a better player. I hope he has a fantastic 2021 season and stays healthy this year. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Also, feel free to follow us on socials at Nxt Lvl Data. Thanks for watching.